Hello and welcome to today's webinar. This is the first of our Net Zero Live virtual event webinars, and it's running for the whole of today and part of tomorrow. I'm Chloe McCulloch, Buildings Editor, and this webinar is in association with the Construction Leadership Council. And it's all about its CC programme designed to drive out carbon from the industry. So speaking today, we've got Hannah Vickers, Chief Executive of the Association for Consultancy and Engineering, and she leads one of the working groups at the CLC. And then we've got David Pinder, Chair of the Green Construction Board, and he also leads one of the working groups. And I think I'm right, David, that it's the Net Zero Carbon Working Group. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Great. Okay. So a great speakers to start us off. Before we get going, I just want to remind the audience that you are very welcome to post questions during the webinar, and I will try and bring those in right at the end. So as questions occur to you, please do post them throughout the hour, and we will get to as many of them as we possibly can. I know we've got a lot of people registered for this webinar. We might not be able to individually respond, but I will do my best to kind of round themes up and put topics to the panel. Right, also I just want to let people know, just in case people have to miss sections of this or want to come back, this session will be recorded, so you can come back to building.co.uk and see the on-demand version. And finally, a reminder that this is just the first of several webinars, so do come back to our website to check the agenda, the full schedule, register. All the webinars are free, so I do encourage you to sign up. Right, that's probably enough from me. We are going to kick off with Hannah, and she's going to take us through the sort of defining what we're talking about here, and then she will hand over to David. If I've got any questions straight after Hannah's presentation, I might just stop for a couple of questions there, but generally the Q&A will be at the end. So David and I are going to switch off our webcams, and it's going to be over to Hannah. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Chloe. Right, so hopefully we can all see the right bit of my screen. Right, so I'm Hannah Vickers. I'm on the Construction Leadership Council, and I am chair of the CC Programme Board, which is why I'm here to talk to you about it. I'm going to caveat my presentation today by saying I am not a net zero expert, so I have come into this as part of an industry change programme. So I'm going to talk about the industry change aspects of net zero and what we need to do and how the CLC is going to lead that change. And thankfully I have David, who is a technical expert in terms of chairing the Green Construction Board, to answer all the difficult net zero questions. So just to manage everybody's expectations before we get started. So I'm going to have a few slides to cover what CC is. So you're actually our first external event where we talk about this, so premiere, if you like, of the CC programme to the sector. I'm very pleased that we're partnering with Building to do that. I'm just going to take you through a few slides and explain what we're aiming to achieve with this change programme, and how you can get involved, and then pass over to David, who's going to give a bit more context about the level of challenge and also some of the support and some of the work that the GCB is offering in terms of technical solutions, but also engagement with government, because clearly there's a big need for policy and legislative incentives here if we are to actually take the whole sector to net zero. So I shall start with a bit of reflection and saying, why are we doing this? So CC came about because we could see a lot of activity across the sector, with the different trade associations, with individual businesses making pledges, making commitments, which is fantastic. There was a lot of energy, but actually what we needed to do was to make sure that the sector as a collective meets the net zero challenge and actually can explain that to the stakeholders, such as the financiers, the investors, but also the government, who are taking a keen interest in how we're getting on and how we are tackling this. So in a lot of ways you can see the parallels with the response to COVID, where the CLC was really able to convene and coordinate a lot of the efforts required by the businesses, by the trade associations to navigate through the COVID pandemic. We're trying to take the same approach here with net zero. So up on screen at the moment are some of the quotes, some of the feedback we were getting towards the end of last year, early this year, around net zero and around the approach. And you can see there's a lot of that. Hopefully some of that resonates with you. You know, there's quite a lot there where people are saying that I've got my own house in order, for example, but I'm worried about my supply chain. You know, there's a lot I'm being asked to sign up to, but I'm not really sure it's actually all going to add up to my business or the sector being able to commit to net zero. And another saying, actually, I'm, you know, the designer there or the developer saying, I can do my part, but actually there's so much more that others in the sector need to do. We're all connected in this, so it's sort of, I can only go so far on my own. So that was the context behind why we thought we needed to sort of step in and take a bit of leadership on this issue. So this, as far as the CLC is concerned, is led from the highest level. So Andy Mitchell is our CLC co-chair. I'm sure that's no surprise to anybody, but he is taking a very hands-on approach to CCC. So it's one of the work streams that he is going to be actively involved with. And he was instrumental really in helping us define what we wanted the programme to achieve. So you can see he's given us a very clear steer. This isn't about the CLC creating more stuff. This is about the CLC coordinating and sharing the efforts that are already existing, and if there are gaps, inviting, you know, organisations in to take the lead on solving some of those challenges. So that's really our purpose with CCC. It is about marshalling the efforts of others and being able to therefore take a kind of whole sector view on whether or not we are going far enough, fast enough, whether we are making good progress. So we'll have a bit of a sort of PR stakeholder management angle to it as well. And as I said, Andy's going to continue as CLC chair, but he is also going to be our advisory board co-chair. So he's taken a very hands-on role with this. And alongside Andy, very, very new news, if you like, is that we are expecting Andrew Griffith to take a very hands-on role. He's indicated he's interested as the Prime Minister's net zero champion. So we're already picking up a lot of government support and interest in this change programme, which is obviously really useful for us in terms of developing that relationship as we go forward. So in terms of the programme itself, we're focused on 3 strands of activity. So we're going to look at performance measurement, because this is really important for us to be able to confidently manage those stakeholders, confidently say we are doing enough. I will touch on this in a bit more detail in a few slides time, but effectively what we are trying to look at is what are the milestones, what are the commitments, what are the metrics that we should be measuring as businesses, but actually how does that all add up to us being able to say that the industry is making enough progress, the sector is making enough progress. So we know there's going to be a need to establish a framework for us to be able to measure our performance on a quarterly basis, and that's something that is very live at the moment, and a bit more on that later. Alongside that, we want to be able to sort of centrally kind of signpost the support and start to share industry learning, because taking a thematic approach, we can see that actually this is going to be something which needs to cut across a lot of the silos we have in the industry. So for example, whether you're a house builder or a developer or an infrastructure client, actually the supply chain that you draw on for your materials and your low carbon materials will be exactly the same. So, you know, whilst we have a good structure of engaging with different segments in the industry, we need to start sharing that learning and joining people up in a thematic way across perhaps some of those business group silos that we have currently. So there's a big piece there around us signposting in a thematic way what's happening in different parts of the sector, so that we can all learn and hopefully ultimately speed up the rate at which we take action and understand net zero, because certain parts of the sector will be more or less ahead of the others. So that's really our role under that second point. And then lastly, there is a big sort of communications and stakeholder management piece. Now this covers, you know, both communications out to the industry. So, you know, we have got a really excellent comms network through all the trade associations that are part of the CLC, and we want to be able to leverage that to, you know, keep everybody up to speed on what is happening, what are the new developments in terms of government policy support, even industry support that is available, and likewise be able to play that back into government. There's a real interest from government to have a sort of single point of contact for the construction sector to be able to talk to about net zero. You know, we will have seen from the Prime Minister's announcements last week, this is sort of top of the government's agenda. They're very, very interested in the run up to COP26, but even beyond that, that net zero becomes a defining part of what this government stands for. So we need to be able to give them confidence that our sector is on top of it and doing what we need to do as a partner to government in that. So there's a really big sort of management part there as well. As we get more sophisticated a bit further into the programme, we will do a bit more, I think, in terms of client engagement, a bit more in terms of consumer engagement. But at the moment, our priorities are being able to tell the story to government and actually be able to share what we're doing across the industry in a more consistent and comprehensive way. So to start with, the first thing I looked at when Andy asked me to step in and as not a net zero expert, the first thing we needed to do was really work out where do we put our effort for best effect. So I'm an engineer, and this is how an engineer would approach net zero. So I worked through the 6th carbon budget, which the Committee on Climate Change published before Christmas, which was really useful because actually it starts to quantify where is the carbon in our sector, where can we have the most impact. Now this is not therefore meant to be a comprehensive set of priorities. This is meant to be based on the facts and the science that we have got, where at a high level do we want to prioritise our efforts. Now, a lot of this is not rocket science, and a lot of this I know many of you on the call will be already taking action on as far as your businesses are concerned. But what was important for us was to have something to be able to act as the foundations for the change programme. So these 9 priorities are the 9 areas where we know we will have the most impact if we focus our efforts. Now, that's not to say that every business has to do something on all of them. The idea is they are thematic, but there should be something on here, at least one of these priorities, that is relevant to every business in the construction sector. And that in itself is meant to give you a bit of a steer on, if I have to do one thing, what is it? Pick one off this list and get stuck into that. So we will use this throughout the programme to monitor our performance against these 9 areas. We will also use it to signpost businesses. So again, you can start to see here they're thematic, and we can start to compare and contrast different approaches across the sector. So we've got carbon measurement there, and that is actually very different from the research that we've seen so far in terms of how infrastructure projects do it compared to how building projects do it, compared to how the retrofit market works with all the EPCs. It's really interesting to see the different approaches, and we can start to kind of collate those up and collate up where you can go for advice and support. So a little bit more on that later, but just to say these 9 priorities I think are key to our change programme and key to us really prioritising our efforts where we're going to have the most impact. So you'll see a lot more of these, and I think they feature again later on in David's presentation as well. So just looking at what we're doing for the next few months, so we have got quite a lot of activity. We kicked this off early in the new year with the analysis to get to the 9 priorities. We launched those at the beginning of March, and now we're in quite a sort of active forming stage for the programme, if you like, where we need to set up a lot of our infrastructure, but a lot of our work streams to be able to then kind of move forward and support the industry. So those 3 work streams I mentioned earlier, there's going to be quite a lot of activity. Some of the things that we are looking at, so the first thing we need to do under performance measurement is actually establish the framework. So what is it? And a lot of this will be things that you perhaps are already measuring, but the idea is we're going to be creating this performance framework and consulting on it over the next few months. We've committed to government that we will do the first quarterly performance report. Now that will obviously not be fully quantitative, but we do need to start getting into that routine of saying on a quarterly basis, what have we done, how have we made progress, and how is that going to give government confidence that we are actually taking net zero seriously. The other things we can look out for over the next few months would be the web presence. So at the moment we're on the CLC website, but we are looking to get that established so that we can do this signposting. And that, again, I expect that to be coming out in May. And the other thing we are working through is getting our series of industry events through the trade associations and the CLC network, which are really focusing on kind of raising everybody's awareness and in a very practical way. So when we talk about upskilling there, it's not necessarily detailed technical training on how to measure carbon. It's a bit more let's have a discussion about one of those priorities and compare and contrast what businesses are doing across the sector. So it's very practical, pragmatic upskilling, trying to help businesses join up and learn from each other. And linked to that, we've got the business champions. So under the comms and engagement, there is work that we are doing towards COP26. There's quite a lot there where we're partnering with government. And again, you'll start to see some more of that come out over the next few months. So at the end of these slides, I have got a sort of summary of exactly what's happening when, so you no need to write this down. I should have said that at the start. I'm sure you're not all sat there scribbling this down at all, but if you were, I'm sorry, I should have said that. Okay, so I'm just going to do a bit of a deep dive now into those first two work streams about what's happening over the next few months, and just start to kind of show you a little bit of a sneak preview. So it's definitely far from ready, complete, finished, but I like to share the content. I like to be open and transparent in how we're going about this. So you're going to get a bit of a sneak preview at where we're up to. So the performance framework is, I say, really something we need to establish early on in the programme. So that we know and we can communicate to government. Now, as soon as we started to look at this, saying how do we measure the sector's performance, you very quickly get into, well, actually, that's going to be an aggregation of what the individual businesses are doing, but also what projects are doing. So that's what we've started to map out. You'll be surprised. You won't be surprised to hear that there's a lot of commitments and pledges and people declaring in each of those first two boxes around businesses and projects. And what we're looking to do is sort of map the most ambitious ones of those into our performance framework, and from that be able to tell the story of how the sector is getting on. So this isn't really about necessarily creating new pledges or commitments, it's about highlighting the ones that will have the biggest impact, so I think it will be helpful for the businesses, and equally then being able to sort of draw a line between what the evidence is saying around who's taking action and how much action is happening across the sector with what we actually need to do. So that's what we're looking to get out of this. If you like, it's a sort of super PMO, but very, very light touch. So there will be metrics, there will be milestones and commitments, but actually I sort of joked to Andy and said that this is a bit of a franchise model in that we're trying to aggregate up what people are already measuring and use that to tell the sector story. This will come out in a draft form for consultation during May. So just to let you, you will get a chance to feed into this, because we know that, however good our network is, it is going to warrant an industry consultation to get this right. And I'll say I'll caveat this heavily by saying this is an indicative view. So this is not, these are example metrics, example commitments of the types of things that we might see in it. What we're working through at the moment is what we should put in it. What are the dates? What are the commitments that that businesses are already doing, already signing up to? But these are these are not them. These are just example ones. So it brings it to life a little bit. And you can see down the left-hand side we've got the priorities, and against each priority. So if you say actually, my business is all about fleet and logistics, you would be all over number one here. And what you would start to see as we build out the performance framework is what are the metrics that you could implement in your business to show that you're making progress on net zero, and what are the commitments that you might want to sign up to. And again, we will be signposting where you go to sign up to those. But the idea is we sort of show you what what good looks like, and you can make a decision yourself with your business about which bits you want to pick and choose out of that. And equally then we will start to kind of aggregate data up out of that to tell the sector story. So it's actually much bigger. You're not expected to be able to read this, but just to say, this is the level of detail that we're going to. The idea being that we need to make sure that these metrics work for every business across the industry. Now, they won't all need to work for every business, but we need to make sure that you have the chance to get hold of some metrics that are meaningful for you in your businesses, but also on your projects. And within that, then we can start to get more data out of the sector to ultimately tell the sector's performance. So just to show you, there's quite a lot of detail in this. Again, this is so that you've got a really good menu of options. It's not so that you have to sign up to 50,000 things and start measuring and monitoring those. But it's just to give you the choice of the best of what's out there at the moment. And what we will be doing is putting some assurance around this to make sure that the commitments are ambitious enough. And that's where David and the Green Construction Board come in, because they've got a lot of quantitative data, they've got a lot of expertise at saying, actually, when you add up the respective tons of carbon, you need to have done this by this date. So we will be sort of putting the performance framework in front of them for some assurance to make sure that actually we can, sort of say that we are going far enough and fast enough, which is obviously really important if we are going to get to net zero. So that's a bit of an indication there. As I said, that is being developed at the moment. It will come out during May for industry consultation. It will be out for about a period of 3 weeks when individual businesses can respond, but also trade associations, networks, groups can respond. We're going to keep it very, very open, because what we want is people's input. So if there are things that are missing, if you think that they're not ambitious enough, if you think that they're impossible, that's all the sort of thing that we want to hear, really, because we need to pitch this right. For it to be meaningful and really get businesses and get projects to take net zero seriously. So I'm just going to move on to, having given you the sort of laid down the law, if you like, around the performance framework and those kind of scary targets. I'm now going to kind of flip to say a little bit about the signposting and support. So this again will be very much focused on showing people what's out there already, but in a thematic way. So rather than you have to kind of hop around different trade associations websites, only see what's happening in your part of the sector, you will be able to take a view across the sector at what's happening. And in doing so, we want to be able to sort of accelerate people's learning. So this is just an example of the types of things that we will have when we get our web presence up. So for each priority, we will start to collate on a thematic basis what resources are available. There's a lot of guidance, there's a lot of tools, calculators, all kinds of things, but we will collate those up. We will signpost what government is doing, so there will be the relevant government strategies. There will be, if there are grant schemes, funding, things like that, we will have those, but by priority, so the thematic. We've got the snapshot there of the performance framework, so how you might think about measuring yourself on this priority. And then lastly, a bit I'm most excited about, and I hate case studies because that's a really naff word. So we've got our business champions and our project champions, which will be really practical. What is another business somewhere else in the sector doing about this priority? What are they? And this is really where we need to start to break down that net zero is not a competitive advantage. Net zero is about us actually collectively learning. So we're going to be, and I'm really pleased that we've just done the first round and we've got about 15 businesses in that. Just sharing their story about what they're doing, and we will be putting those up as very practical, useful insights so that people can see actually what is happening, even if it's not in their part of the sector. So that comes from our first ask, which is business champions. So we're going to be taking those on a monthly basis, and the idea is you can put yourself, your business forward to say what you're doing, what you plan to do. And we will keep checking back in with these businesses to see how they get on, see if they want to update things on a quarterly basis with new stuff they've done. But the idea is we start to really get some good practical examples. And equally, we will be leaning on these businesses to be spokespeople on behalf of the industry when we get into some of that government engagement, put them up in front of ministers and things, and just be able to confidently say, this is what I'm doing, and this is why I know it's the right thing, and how it aligns to the 9 priorities. So there's the first ask there. A bit more on how to get involved with that later on. So just to conclude, I've got a few slides on how we're communicating all of this, because obviously there's a lot of action happening at the moment. We're just about in May really to sort of kick off quite an intensive period of communications. So our targets are government. So there's a big interest in government in the run-up to COP26, and we are, I say we, Stuart in Bays, who is doing a fantastic job as our head of stakeholder engagement, is running around getting construction plugged into everything related to net zero that the government is doing. So we're not short on offers there, but it's actually very good to go in at multiple points and give a consistent, coherent story on what we're doing. Outside of the sector, we will start to engage more in the media and with the press when we get our interesting things to say, like our business champions, our project champions. We're also looking at working with ITN to make a film about net zero in the sector, and what we our role in getting to net zero. So there's pieces of work there. I've mentioned already the sector events. That is really about us helping ourselves. We'll be leaning on the trade associations to host those. And we've got a good programme of those starting to form. And then lastly, these business champions that I have already touched on, but we're going to be starting initially to download content from them, but over time use them as advocates and spokespeople for the programme. So just to conclude with some key milestones, things to look out for over the next few months. So during May is quite a busy period. We get our first cohort of business champions launched. So there will be things to read about there. You will start to see those businesses that are taking the lead on certain priorities. So the first cohort of those will be launched in the next couple of weeks. We've got this industry consultation on the performance framework happening, and we will get the web presence up. So you can imagine my programme team at the moment quite busy getting all of that out. Then as we move into June, we will do our first quarterly performance report for the sector. We're going to be publishing our business champions on a monthly basis, so we get the second cohort out there. And then we start to go into this kind of themed comms, which is a bit of a campaign mentality around focusing each month on what we're doing with different aspects. So the first thing we're going to look at is the role of the sector deal in meeting net zero. We then go on to the role of the young leaders in climate change in July. So to finish off, opportunities to get involved, and I think we will return to this later on, but under the performance measurement framework, obviously there's a chance to respond to the industry consultation in May. That will all be out on the CLC website, but we will do a big press launch, so I'm sure through building you'll be made aware of it and the opportunity to feed back on that before we sort of lock down what we think should be in it during June. There is as well there the opportunity to consider your role in reporting, particularly if you're a trade association, an organisation that gathers data. We are looking for organisations to step forward and say, that metric I will take the lead on collating it and feeding that back up and through to the CLC. So have that in mind as well. On the signposting and the support, there is the opportunity to become a business champion. We take those an intake on the 15th of every month. There is no limit. As long as you are doing something and you can align it to the 9 priorities and you think it's worth talking about, then absolutely consider putting yourself forward on that. And likewise, we mentioned the events programme that will be working with the trade associations, representative bodies, or Building Magazine on partnering with different events where we've got things to tell, where we've got these interesting stories coming out of the sector about what's happening. And then lastly, on the comms and engagement, I've mentioned the themed comms month, but also as we go towards the second half of the year, aligning COP26 plans. I know individual businesses are looking at this as well as trade associations and the like. So again, think about how we might join that up, and I'm sure there'll be opportunities over the summer for us to finesse those plans. But there we go. So bit of a whistle stop tour, quite a lot going on, as you can tell, but hopefully that leaves you with some ways to get involved and get stuck in as you might like to. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I'm just going to pop back in here just to pick up on some of those themes, because obviously there was a lot there. Exciting times, and obviously Building is delighted to premiere your change programme and would obviously want to be involved in your future activities on it. It sounds very positive, very busy. I suppose I probably just from a practical point of view, when people want to get involved, it feels like this is a real call to action to the industry to get involved, to share best practice, to share what they're doing. You mentioned an enhanced web presence. Are we talking a new website? What exactly are we talking about?
Yeah, no, so right, so no, so it will be a part of the CLC's website, but we're going to build out a section of it. So you will be able to find everything as you do now on the CLC's website, but we're going to have, if you like, on the landing page, a big kind of click here for CONSTRUCTZero, and then you're into this part where we build out a lot more of the content and a lot more of the sort of news opportunities to get involved. So that is something which is under development, probably out in the next, I don't want to pin my team down, but I think the next couple of weeks.
Okay, great. It sounds, just a reminder to the audience as well, please post your questions. I will bring those in towards the end. Just one other question. So you mentioned your team on this, Hannah. Given that there's a lot of activity, what kind of team do you have? What sort of resources is the CLC able to put into this? Because it's huge.
Yeah, so in a similar way to how we approached the COVID response, this is done entirely by volunteers to date. Now, government is taking a keen interest, so there may well be, I think, over time, the opportunity to, to partner and perhaps secure some funding. But I mean, we do have, it is largely the #1 priority for the trade association. So we've got a lot of willing volunteers, and we have an excellent secretariat and support function in Bays. So, between that and the work that is already happening through things like the Green Construction Board that David chairs, and the other CLC work streams. So we know Brian Berry is doing great work with the FMB around the retrofit strategy. So we're actually able to lean on other organisations across the CLC network. But yes, so lots of volunteers.
Okay, so we will get into some of the policy stuff, I think, after David's presentation. But yeah, just a final reminder to our listeners, you do have a chance to post questions. Please do that. Also, we've had some questions in just asking if this will be available on demand, because people may have missed little sections of it. It definitely will be. So come back to Building's website and you can find the whole thing recorded. Right, so Hannah and I are going to disappear and we're going to hand over to David. David, are you able to share your screen? Have you got the controls for that?
I think I have. Let's give it a go.
Okay.
Hopefully, is that working?
Yeah, we just need to see your slides. We can see your screen, but it's on your browser.
Yeah, why this all worked in practice.
It did, didn't it? It's always the way. Perfect. And then you just need to set it into presentation mode and you should be away.
Great, got it from current slide. That was the key thing. Well, first of all, big thank you to Hannah. That was probably the most important part of the presentation, because in all the time I've been in the GCB, which is about 3 years, most people ask me what they can do to contribute. So, this is really explaining how people, oops, sorry, just trying to clear a box in the corner. This is explaining how you can get involved, and I think that's the really key thing. But what I'd also like to cover today, if I may, is just picking up on the Green Construction Board and the action that's taking place, somewhat in the background perhaps, but also look at government policy and the way that's developing, because it's really a huge amount of policy coming out at the moment ahead of COP26, and I'd like to take you through that briefly, but also talk about maybe where some of the gaps are as we see it. Just quickly, the Green Construction Board, what is it? Well, it's the sustainability arm of the Construction Leadership Council. Its main role and purpose is to advise government and industry on regulatory policy, regulatory frameworks, and the actions that we need to deliver a greener built environment. Our core objective is to accelerate the transition to net zero carbon, but it's also a broader sustainability agenda that we're pursuing. We like to take the opportunity whenever we can to input knowledge and expertise and thought leadership on net zero and biodiversity, waste reduction, circular economy, and so on into the CLC work streams. They're really the more the delivery mechanisms, and all of which is hopefully leading us to high performance buildings, structures, infrastructure that lead to deliver zero carbon, zero waste, and less impact on biodiversity, and very importantly, provide a wider social value. So who are we? Well, membership comes from across the industry and up and down the supply chain and value chain. So we have membership from tier 1 contractors, from manufacturers, designers, architects, property management companies, so really across the supply chain. We get involved in work streams as we think are necessary at given points in time. We get lots of support from Bayes construction team, but also from the CPA, but we do work across government, so we're working with all of the departments of Bayes, as well as MHCLG, the IPA, DEFRA, and so on. In terms of the priorities that Hannah was speaking to, it is possible to look at the work that the Green Construction Board has been doing over time, and also the work streams that we've got running, and look at how that maps onto those priorities. And so I've attempted to do that here. What we can clearly see is that the focus of the GCB has largely been around construction activity, infrastructure and buildings, and less on transports. There's plenty for others to get involved with. I don't plan to go through all of these reports and recommendations. You can find them on the CLC website. If you look under GCB, you'll find many of the reports there. I would like to draw your attention, though, if I may, to the Infrastructure and Carbon Review 7 years on report. That is a report that released in the last fortnight. It's looking, as the name suggests, at the lessons learned 7 years on from the original carbon reduction commitments that many large contractors made, and it gives us a lot of advice and lessons as to how we can improve our management of carbon. And in parallel with that, of course, we released the PAS 2080 guidance as to how to manage carbon in major infrastructure projects. And we're also looking at rewriting that, bringing it up to date in the next few months ahead of COP26. We've got funding for that, I'm pleased to say, and also looking at whether we can move that forward to become an ISO standard. The other area that's worth mentioning is the National Retrofit Strategy, and I'll come back to that. But we see the existing building stock, the 28 million homes that are already built, that of course most of them will still be with us in 2050, as the most difficult area to address, and probably the most important area to address. And so we put a consultative document together with, as Hannah's already mentioned, Brian Berry and the RMI team. That's one of the work streams of the CLC. We've put that to Treasury, and we're looking for government to back it. So it's really looking at a pathway over a much longer time frame to deliver a retrofit of the existing housing stock. But many more reports, you can find them all on the CLC website, and no doubt they'll also be you'll also be able to access them through the new CCC website. Coming to policy, I'd like to kick off by saying thank you to Theresa May. She was responsible for challenging us all with a clean growth mission. That's where we were asked to reduce the energy demand in buildings by 50% by 2030, both new build and retrofit. And in the Green Construction Board, we put together a couple of empirical studies, case studies showing how that's possible. And you won't be surprised to learn that it's entirely possible to achieve that today. And we were able to point to many examples showing that that is the case. She also, of course, committed us to our legally binding net zero target by 2050, and showed great leadership at the time, in fact, the first nation to do it. If we look at the government's current commitment towards net zero policies, we'll see that there was a 9.2 billion promise in the Conservative Party manifesto. Of course, that was pre-COVID. The balance sheet of the country is in slightly worse condition now than it was then, but nonetheless, that funding is still required. But the current spend and commitments within this Parliament are below that level. There was the NDC, the Nationally Determined Contribution, perhaps went under the radar a little bit, but that was a commitment made in December to reduce carbon by 68% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. But there were bigger announcements still to come, and I'll come on to that in a moment. How do we know if we're going to achieve these targets or if we're on track? Well, that's really the role of the Climate Change Committee, as I'm sure you're aware. They set the interim targets in the shape of carbon budgets. They have a lot of the data sets, and they report on progress and hold the government to account. Rather helpfully, they also design technical pathways and advise on how we can achieve net zero, and they also advise on the policy measures that we need to hit the milestones. Last week, was it only last week, the Prime Minister made an announcement which confirmed that we are actually going to accept the advice given by the CCC in the shape of its 6th carbon budget, and commit to reducing our carbon emissions by 78% by 2035, and that's including international aviation and shipping for the first time. And that will also be a legal requirement. The government's already laid legislation to that effect. So a really important milestone for us to achieve. I've said, so what? Well, it's a really, really highly ambitious target for the mid-2030s. I mean, hats off to the government. Again, we're showing global leadership on this subject. It's an incredibly challenging target. If you consider that it's almost the same as the UK's previous 2050 target of reducing carbon by 80% compared to 1990 levels by 2050, that has been brought forward to 2035. So a huge challenge. And what that actually means is that over half of the required emissions reductions have to take place in the next 15 years. So we're looking at reducing more between 29 and 2035 per year than we are in the end of the cycle, 2035 to 2050. The good news is that that target is fully aligned to the balanced pathway as described by the Climate Change Committee and as published in their 6th carbon budget. So there is a way, there is a pathway to get us there. You will probably recall there was quite a lot of press coverage of this at the time. So in December, when the 6th carbon budget was announced, there were a number of very high profile calls to action made by the CCC. Now, if we're to deliver against the 6th carbon budget carbon reductions by 2035, that's 78%, then literally we're going to have to throw the kitchen sink at it, which means undertaking all of these recommendations. So you'll be familiar with the banning of diesel and petrol cars by 2030, the banning of natural gas boilers by 2033, things like the massive expansion that we need to make on low carbon energy supplies, with the quadrupling of offshore wind generation by 2030, and requiring 10 times the current amount of offshore wind generation by 2050. And that's in addition to pursuing a hydrogen production agenda. We also need to use our resources better with recycling, and we also need to change our diets, eating less meat and less dairy. But you'll know all this stuff, it's been in the press. The really key one, as far as we're concerned from the construction angle, is that we do need to significantly reduce the demand placed on the energy sector by improving the energy performance of our existing homes, which means improving insulation, taking a fabric first approach, as well as decarbonising heat. And then finally, making better use of our land to grow energy crops, but also to plant more trees. That was the headline stuff. And then if you look at some of the specific things that relate to our homes, the CCC was recommending the implementation of the Future Home Standard by 2025 at the latest, having private rented and social homes achieve EPC-C by 2028, putting in standards for lenders such that we wouldn't be able to access a mortgage unless we achieved certain levels of EPC performance or improvement, and indeed all homes for sale having to achieve an EPC standard, in this case C, by 2028. So using the EPC as a mechanism to really force change within the existing housing stock that we have in place already today. The good news is that policy has been following that pathway. So we've already heard from MHCLG in terms of their response to the current round of building regulations, and we've gone for the higher 31% uplift. That was the higher of the two options. We know that the Future Home Standard is on target for 2025, and the transitional period has been reduced to 12 months. That's a massive 75% uplift on today's standard. And the consultation in relation to the future buildings standard has just been completed. So the government's had feedback on that, and we're really keen for government to press on and tell us what that will look like, because of course in non-domestic buildings we need to start planning and designing to those standards sooner rather than later in order to build out to those standards in 2025. So good progress from MHCLG. We also had a white paper from BAYS that reflected the uplift in things like quadrupling of offshore wind by 2030. It also pointed to the decarbonisation of heat in existing homes, giving us that target of 600,000 heat pumps per year by 2028, which is hugely challenging. But also for the first time spoke about retrofit plans for existing homes and introduced the concept of the Green Homes Grant, which, as we know, subsequently has been shelved, although the local authority delivery part of it continues, and actually some of the funding has been diverted into that scheme, which is running much more successfully. And then there was also funding signalled for decarbonisation of public buildings. In addition to which, we've got the Environment Bill and housing developers having to work within the guidelines of that as well. So we've had other announcements. We had the Prime Minister's 10-point plan for an green industrial revolution. In truth, that was mostly looking at supply side, so looking at ways of generating the power in a renewable way. We had a repeat of the announcements in relation to the Green Homes Grant and the public sector decarbonisation scheme. Those commitments were restated, but there was also a real desire from number 10 for London to become the global centre for green finance. I think we all recognise the massive role that green finance could play and needs to play in delivering decarbonisation, particularly of the existing housing stock. One area that is, I think, really encouraging is around social housing, and we saw the announcement of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which had, I think it was 3.8 billion in the Tory Party manifesto set aside for it. We saw 50 million coming forward for the pilot schemes. Actually, that number has been increased, I believe, to 160 million, and that's to facilitate multiple measures in each of the projects. I think there's something like 50 projects now awarded and up and running. So I've got a lot of confidence that that will deliver. But what's really important is in the pipeline, we've got the long-awaited heat and building strategy, and that should define the pathway to decarbonise heat in existing buildings, as well as setting minimum EPC standards for different tenures. And although it's already overdue, I hope we can confidently say it should be with us by no later than June. There's also the net zero strategy that we're expecting to see pre-COP26, although there's been little said about that. And talking to the business secretary earlier in the week, it does look as though we should get a Green Homes Grant reboot in the autumn spending review, although we would all like to see that as a longer term strategy rather than an ad hoc strategy. And we're really desperate for some industry consultation before that comes forward. So what about the policy gaps? Well, I think there's general consensus now that there needs to be a revision of the building regulations in terms of not building towards nominal buildings, looking more at predicting in-use performance with post-build verification, and looking at the total energy demand in kilowatt hours for buildings, and making sure that we close the performance gap. I mean, it's in some cases you could almost argue that the performance gap is bigger than the contribution of an uplift in building regulations. So this is a really key point. And the same has to occur with existing buildings in terms of the retrofit step change that we need, and moving from a theoretical EPC rating to an in-use performance prediction and then verification. One area we're really keen on, and the more you look into government policy, the biggest gap seems to be around this national retrofit strategy. So we've been calling for that within the CLC. We put out a consultative document. We believe it has to be a long-term strategy, not just an ad hoc policy like the Green Homes Grant. It will need significant investment from government. We need to address 27 million homes. We need to get on with the job of upskilling our workforce. We probably need something like 500,000 new roles within the industry, whether that's on the installation side or whether it's retrofit coordinators or whether it's retrofit assessors. All of those will be needed in order to upgrade homes in accordance with PAS 2035. And we really think it's important to introduce digital green building passports so that we're able to log the pathway that is most appropriate for individual buildings to follow in order to get to net zero, and to keep a record of that and almost have a logbook to show progress over time. So all those measures don't necessarily have to happen in one go, but a whole house retrofit could happen over time following that pathway. There's also an issue around rebalancing costs on energy and narrowing the spark gap. At the moment, the coefficient of performance of heat pumps is probably in most cases less on a seasonally adjusted basis than the difference in cost of energy between electricity and natural gas. So that doesn't really give us an incentive to install heat pumps. There's very little support for commercial heat pumps in policy, and that needs addressing as well. And we absolutely believe there needs to be a whole life carbon assessment for major construction projects, looking at a combination of operational and embodied carbon so that we don't miss the embodied element, which is also critical. So that hopefully gives a flavour of where policy is headed, where we think some of the gaps are. I think the good news is that government is by and large following the guidance of the CCC. We have got this big gap around the heat and buildings strategy. We hope that the national retrofit strategy will inform that, and a lot of it will find its way into that heating and building strategy. And if we do that, we'll be in much better shape to deliver against our new and very demanding 2035 targets. So just to finish with a reminder that well over half of the required emission reductions are to be delivered in the next 15 years. So we need to get on with the job. So that was all I wanted to say. So thank you for listening. And now I will unshare my screen and go back to Chloe.
Thank you so much, David. I think that really gave us a great sort of whistle-stop tour of where we've come from, where we're going, what's in the pipeline, but also the enormous challenge and really the reason why there's got to be a sector sort of coordinated program, which you're doing. So it really brings home why it's necessary. So thank you for that. Before, we've had loads of questions in, but before I get stuck into that, I just wanted to really pick up quickly on one policy area that you just hinted at, where you said you expected possibly the possibility of the Green Homes Grant reboot in the autumn. Now, is that based on conversations you're having with Treasury?
That was based on a conversation that we had with the business secretary on Monday. So we have regular roundtable meetings, the CLC does, with Anne-Marie Trevelyan, but on this occasion we were fortunate we had Kwasi Kwarteng join us. And Hannah, you can witness this. He definitely said, didn't he, that he expected that the Green Homes Grant or an equivalent would be coming forward into the comprehensive spending review in the autumn. So I wouldn't say it was a promise, but there was a clear indication that something will have to replace the Green Homes Grant. Now we hope that it will be a longer term commitment, and we hope that we'll see that expressed in a heat and building strategy that's due out shortly. But there needs to be money attached to it, and we'll see that hopefully in the comprehensive spending review.
Great. Okay, well, look, you heard it here first, so we'll be watching that space. Okay, so there was loads there. I think what I'll do, just because of time, I'll just get stuck into some of the questions that we've got coming in. One of which I think I'll direct towards you, David. I hope you can answer this one. Is, will the group work with the CCC to establish a construction sector portion of the UK carbon budget and then align target reductions to reach net zero accordingly? Is that a logical approach?
Yes, absolutely. So there is a programme of work that's taking place with a consortium of interested parties led by the UK GBC, not to be confused with the Green Construction Board. So that's a membership body that we work very closely with. And we're looking at a roadmap to net zero for the construction sector that actually disaggregates the challenge that's posed towards industry to the subsector level of construction. And that route map is being developed right now. We're hopeful that that might be ready before COP26.
Okay,
so,
great. Well,
yeah, and just to say, we work very closely with the CCC in any case, yeah.
I think, yeah, so that question came in, and I guess it's looking for, from Michelle, looking for sort of reassurance that it is all joined up, and the logic is there. So that's a yes to that question. Just as you mentioned COP26, one of my questions, which seems to be aligned with one of our listeners as well, is you know, around the activity of COP26, how can companies apply to showcase examples there, and what's your activity planned around that event?
So it's a very busy event, as you can imagine, because it's global. So it's not even just that we're, you know, looking at sort of UK companies. There is a kind of global interest in it. So the process for putting an expression of interest in, that's now closed, but as CLC we've put an expression of interest in, as have a number of the membership bodies. What we're expecting to happen now is that we, over the next few months, work with government to see the outcome of, you know, what expressions have they had from around the world, how can they best structure the event. I will just manage expectations here in that, you know, the jury is still very much out on whether this is actually going to be a physical event. And I suspect, you know, looking at what's happening around the world, the in-person presence will be very small, in which case, you know, in some ways that means that you've got a huge opportunity to start to, you know, to get involved, because everything will be online. So there is quite a lot of uncertainty, if I'm honest, around COP26 and what it actually looks like. But needless to say, the CLC is involved. Once we've got some clarity on what, you know, what it actually looks like, I think we will be looking out to, you know, to businesses, probably to our business champions, but also through the trade associations to help kind of shape what actually happens on the day. But equally, I think there is, you know, more than likely to be an opportunity to do parallel events during the same period. So again, I think that's worth thinking about if you're an individual business as well.
Okay, that kind of links on to another question, which is around how do you go about becoming a business champion?
Ah, great, good. I was hoping we were going to get this question. So, so it's quite a simple process. You can do it through the CLC's website. There is a contact there. So, if you want to do it directly to Bays, it's through Stuart Young. You can get his details. I can share those details, Chloe, so that we can circulate them to the attendees. Equally, all of the trade associations have been recruited to recruit business champions. So if you're a member of Build UK or, you know, Seeker, or ACE, even, you know, my organisation, they will know how to put you forward. And we do an intake on the 15th of each month. It's quite simple. It is to start with, is a structured interview that just asks you about what you're doing against the 9 priorities. So if you want to start thinking about preparing for it, have a look at the 9 priorities and say, actually, you know, what is it I'm doing? How can I tell my story? And then look to your trade association or directly to the CLC. And we look forward to having lots of them.
Great. Okay. There was also another question. I guess this is more of a concern. So, you know, Anthony's saying, I'm delighted to hear that construction is coming together. However, how will it ensure that the interests of large players, such as, you know, the volume house builders, don't set the agenda, you know, and that it's, you know, yeah, so I guess it's not wanting to sort of backpedal on commitments.
Yes. So I think this one is, I'm going to sound like Boris. So we have to follow the science. You know, what David has just said about the importance of retrofit and domestic retrofit is actually probably going to be, you know, a big part of our role in achieving net zero will be led by SMEs, because they're going to be the, you know, the organisations that get stuck into that retrofit programme. So, you know, I think it would be remiss of us to think actually we just get the big ones on board and that's easy. So I think what we are looking to do, again, through the trade stations, through things like the industry consultation, is we want to be able to publish this performance framework that gives a good steer to SMEs. So organisations that don't have a head of sustainability and a lot of people who know about carbon in the organisation, the whole point of this is to try to help some of those organisations be able to take appropriate action. So I think there's a balance to be had on the kind of policy side. That's David's bag, making sure that, you know, he's hearing from everybody to lobby for the right things. But in terms of the business support, we very much are, yeah, cognizant that it's not about, you know, let's do this and let's get some complicated science-based targets with your head of sustainability, because that doesn't apply to the majority of the sector.
Yeah. Anything you want to add in that one, David?
Yeah, just to say that the HBF is taking a lead role and working with the Bridgewater Initiative in developing a response to the Future Home Standard call to action. And from what I've seen of it, it's actually not pushing back on it. I mean, there is a bit of a history of housing developers pushing back, but on this occasion, I think they're embracing it. So it does look as though you know, we're working together to deliver against those requirements rather than finding ways around them. So it's actually really positive and really constructive.
Well, look, that sounds like a positive note to end on. I'm sorry we haven't been able to get through all the questions, but the number of questions I think reflects the interest that's out there. So I do encourage everyone who's been on the call to check out the CLC's website, to keep tabs on the new microsite that's going to be launching soon. And obviously we will invite the CLC to come back and talk more through building the website so that we can help share their next steps. But it sounds like a great start, lots of activity happening. So if you want a recap on it, this is all available on demand. So please do come back to it. So my thanks to David and to Hannah. And just a reminder to our listeners that this is just the start of Net Zero Live. So come back to our website to find out more of the scheduled webinars to come. Thank you very much and goodbye.